Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Helen. I'm with the ACCESS team. Thanks for joining us today for the ACCESS Presents webinar. ACCESS Presents is a webinar series that's led by our education and training theme, so thanks to them for enabling this. So today's webinar, as you know, is focused on Canada's Special Access Program and just a little bit of sort of background context. A couple of us from Access heard Gwendolyn and Lori speak at the Rare Kids Can annual meeting maybe in April, earlier in April, I think now, a couple months ago, about their work on the SAP program and potential improvements. We thought it was a important area and that it would be of interest for our Access community as well. So we were happy to invite them to give an Access Presents webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Gwendolyn and Lori in just a second, but I will sort of take care of some housekeeping pieces first. So we'll let Gwendolyn and Lori go through their presentation. If you can hold your questions and comments until the end, there'll be lots of time for questions and comments and discussion after the main presentation. There'll be two ways that you can ask questions or provide thoughts and comments at that point. One is through the chat. So the chat comes to us, the presenters, so I can read out any of the questions that come through the chat at the end. And also to make it a little bit more conversational, you can also raise your virtual hand, so that little yellow or whatever color hand that comes up. So if you use the react button at the bottom of your screen and just raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask your question or provide comments to Gwendolyn and Lori that way as well. So we can again do that after the presentation. And I think with that, I can welcome Gwendolyn Moncrief Gould, who's with the Sick Kids Child Health Policy Accelerator, and Lori Anderson, who's with LCOA Consulting. So over to you. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Helen. And as much as this is an education session, it's also very much a chance for us to learn from everyone on the line here. So please do contribute, offer feedback, and we will share our emails at the end as well, so that if you are thinking about this after the presentation and have a thought that we should consider, please do let us know. But yes, I'm Gwendolyn Moncrief Gould. I'm the policy lead with the Child Health Policy Accelerator at Sick Kids. And we have been partnering with Rare Kids Can and with other pediatric institutions, of course, to take a look at some of the most, we'll say, frustrating or pieces of Health Canada regulation, let's say, that are getting in people's way, whether it's as a clinician, a patient, a parent, or a researcher. We are consulting both with the Rare Kids community and with folks like all of you to make sure that kids and really all Canadians have access to timely treatment when and where they need it. So the SAP is one piece that has come up a few times as a bit of a stone in the shoe, which is why we are here today. And Lori, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gwendolyn. My name's Lori Anderson. I'm a regulatory consultant. I've been embedded in the Health Canada space for about 22 years, working with all of the directorates in terms of doing Health Canada submissions. I'm an active participant of the Rare Kids Can network and also with MyCERN, and I'm super thrilled to be here today and honestly to hear what all of you have to tell us about things that you think work well, aren't working well, could be improved. We're really pleased to be here and to, as Gwendolyn said, to learn from you.
Want to go over your disclaimer to start?
Sure. I was just, the typical disclaimer for any presentation, just letting you know that things change. Things may be slightly inaccurate. We just, if you're looking for, you're encouraged just to always refer directly to appropriate regulatory source for exact requirements, but hopefully we're not going to teeter off of that, but just put it in there as our, standard disclaimer statement.
And this is almost a disclaimer on my end as well, as of course, I'm based at Sick Kids. We partner with the Rare Kids Can network. We are looking specifically for policy changes and working on advocacy that will help pediatric patients first and foremost. But I think everything we're talking about today applies equally to the adult population, to oncology, to other rare diseases, to folks in neither of those categories. So our impetus for starting this work was pediatric rare diseases, but I don't think we're in any way limited to that space. And just to emphasize that, I took just a quick snapshot of some of the headlines that we've seen, I think, just in the past year or two about barriers to access to treatment that Canadians all across the country have seen. So very much hoping that our outcomes here will be policy change that benefits all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So to get us started, I think we wanted to give everyone a sense of our understanding of the Special Access Program, the single patient study sort of system as it currently operates, get into a couple of international alternatives and examples, and then really turn it over to the group to let us know what's good, what's bad, what could change, what should we not try and change. So we will leave plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So to start, as I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with, the Special Access Program is the pathway that Health Canada has created to ensure that patients who are in serious or life-threatening condition and have really gone through all other treatment options that are already available in Canada still have a way to access treatments that are on market or available outside of Canada. In Canada, unlike in our other jurisdictions, which we'll get into, importing a drug that is not on market does require advanced approval from Health Canada. So you have to submit a request, you have to provide evidence that includes data about the use, safety, and efficacy of the drug. And Health Canada does and certainly can refuse to issue that authorization if they feel like the evidence is not sufficient. This is done on a case-by-case basis, patient by patient, so it's not a blanket authorization. And as many of you on the line probably know, it can be a little time-consuming rather than going and prescribing a medication. You do have to go and get approval in advance before you can move ahead with treatment. So the ideal SAP process, as we understand it, is that a patient with a life-threatening condition seeks treatment. They exhaust all options available on market in Canada. Their clinician or healthcare provider identifies treatment available in a foreign jurisdiction, but not domestically. They apply for, they receive SAP approval, the patient is treated, hopefully they get better. That's fantastic. In practice, what I think we understand has been increasingly happening is that SAP requests have been denied, often due to insufficient data. Some of this may be a recent development. Some of this is more focused on drugs that do not have as much data behind them. And we do know that there is a huge demand in the SAP program for medications that are not on market in Canada, but have been used for years and years. So there are sort of two buckets of treatments that go through the process. What we have understood so far, and would welcome all of your feedback on this, is that clinicians are often being referred to single patient studies when they are denied when their SAP approvals are denied. And as Laurie will get into, this typically means that they have to set up a full clinical trial, run the trial in order to access the medication, and in some cases keep the patient on the trial in the long run in order to continue treating them. We have heard anecdotal cases where clinicians have not been able to run the trial for a variety of different reasons, meaning that the patient then wasn't able to be treated. And we also know of several families, and happy to hear more experiences, who decided to move outside of Canada in order to access treatment for their, in our case, for their children, either because they could not find a suitable trial in Canada, or because the treatment was really only going to be approved in other jurisdictions, especially in the United States, from what we've heard. This is sort of the state of play as it is, and then I will turn it over to Laurie to get into what exactly a single patient study is and what it means for families trying to access care.
Absolutely. So when we talk about a single patient study or an SPS, this is also known as an open label individual patient study or an OLIP. This was really put into place with pediatrics in mind, and it was designed to provide a route so that there could be rapid access to novel therapies when, as Gwendolyn mentioned, the drug is too investigational for the Special Access Program, or there's not a clinical trial available in Canada for a child to participate in. So, the conditions are the same as for SAP. We are looking at serious life-threatening conditions. Children are not eligible for, have exhausted all their treatment options. There's no other way to access treatment. But this does become a fully regulated clinical trial per Division 5 of the Food and Drug Regulations. It's limited to one patient. And again, it's applicable if the SAP program believes that this is really deemed to be more researched, or if there's just little known about the drug for them to feel comfortable approving it under the Special Access Program. We are, in this case, eligible for expedited review and an abbreviated regulatory package to Health Canada in terms of the clinical trial application that's submitted. And the one thing about an OLIP or a single patient study is it does allow for data collection to advance knowledge of the study drug. So that is a benefit of the single patient study. So again, we'll look at few more details here in terms of these single patient studies. So really importantly is that you have to have a partnership with pharma to procure the drug in order to run your single patient study and obtain an investigator brochure if applicable for the drug that you're going to be using. A clinical trial application, or a CTA, to include CMC data, so all of our chemistry, manufacturing, quality data, if it's applicable for the drug to be used, must be submitted to Health Canada and authorized in advance of doing the trial. And then, of course, there are ongoing post-authorization obligations to Health Canada that must be fulfilled in terms of amendments or notifications, annual updates of your IB, safety reporting, and facts if you're doing a study with a biologic. Health Canada recommends a pre-CTA meeting, but clearly we've heard from many people this is often not something that can be obtained in a timely fashion when you're looking at someone who has a life-threatening condition. And then there is the obligation to follow good clinical practices because, again, we are a fully regulated clinical trial. So as a regulated trial, we have other considerations here. And these are the same obligations that you're going to have as if you are doing a phase 3 multi-center clinical trial with hundreds of patients. We have to ensure that there's REB approval and that you adhere with ongoing obligations to your REB. So again, all your amendments to your study, to your consent forms, everything that needs to be required. You have to obtain informed consent. And you also have to have an adverse event reporting plan, study monitoring, and then, of course, there's your regulatory binder and all the essential documents you have to run your study, so standard operating procedures. You have to ensure your staff has Division 5 training. There has to be management of your investigational product, and that includes actually Health Canada required labeling standards. If you're doing electronic data capture, you're going to need a validated database. And then, of course, there's the record-keeping requirement of 15 years. So all of this adds up to increased time, increased cost, and increased expertise that's needed because often the people who are applying to the SAP program are clinicians. They are not trialists. So this just adds a whole different layer onto what they're intending to do. So what have we heard so far? As Helen mentioned, we all got together in Ottawa as part of the Rare Kids Can conference this year in April. And we talked to people about the Special Access Program and single patient studies and asked them what their concerns were. And some of the things that we've heard to date are, the Special Access pathway, we have to do an application to and get that approval from Health Canada before treatment can take place. Repeated applications have to be made for the same medication as new cases emerge. A really big one that we heard over and over again was the lack of transparency and standards for use, safety, and efficacy evidence. And the fact that clinicians are often referred over to the SPS after applying for SAP. And again, as I mentioned before, a lot of clinicians are not aware of what Health Canada requirements are, as well as the post-authorization obligations that come along with being a fully regulated clinical trial. I included this paper here because if you ever have a chance to read it, this is an exceptional paper. It came out of UBC with work that was being done in the HIV/AIDS area. And it was a case study of really Health Canada's SAP program. This was published in 2006, and I can tell you that much of what's in there is still what we're hearing today. So I think this is why we're looking for what can we do to change is what we can do to make this better. In terms of single patient studies, what did we hear? We heard that really research is often secondary to treatment. People are telling us, I just want to treat this patient. There are no other options for them. This is not intended to be research. Again, the essence of having to have a regulated clinical trial and all the obligations that go along with it for a single patient. Even with expedited review of our regulatory submission, there is delays, and there are going to be delays. There's going to have to be REB approvals that come into play as well, potentially institutional approvals as well. And this causes delay to urgently needed care. There is the concern that the PI is wearing both a researcher and a clinician hat, and if there is a conflict of interest that's occurring there. And of course, the patient has to adhere to all parts of the protocol. So there may be some elements to it that you would not normally see in routine care, but because you are now under a regulated protocol, you are having to follow everything that is contained within there. And even though for single patient studies, we do have a different type of abbreviated protocol there, this still does come into play. The regulatory burden is not sustainable for some researchers or sponsors. We're looking at, not just doing the CTA. Other factors may come into play, such as other drugs that may be part of that protocol that are non-investigational, that are going to cause us to do other regulatory work, like an investigational status assessment. So there's a whole lot to consider here in terms of the regulatory burden. Privacy challenges due to low patients of number with a condition, that's always a concern when we are writing a protocol where someone can potentially be identified. This is prevented by Health Canada in terms of they do not publish these results on their trial site, their trial registry site. And then, of course, when a study becomes research, there's increased health system and regulatory costs. This requires long-term regulation supervision throughout the treatment, even when this medication use could be long-term for these participants. They're going to be in this, what is considered an ongoing clinical trial. And really, the really important one here, there are fewer drugs approved in Canada for pediatric rare disease. And there's fewer clinical trials in Canada. We see this. Gwendolyn mentions that people move to other jurisdictions to access trials and to access treatment. So we're going to see an increase in this space. This is one of my favorite slides here, and I'm hoping that maybe some of the authors of this paper may be in this call today. But this is a paper, some work that was done by a group that had representatives from Sick Kids, C17, MyCERN. They really looked at the SPS space and how it is come into play in Canada. They evaluated its purpose, its successes, its limitations, and even came forward with some suggestions for improvement. What I really like is how well they illustrate for us here that there are single patient studies that are for access, and there are single patient studies that are for research. There clearly is a different. Novel therapies or gene therapies, we're going to see those as research, but there are other treatments where we might be looking at a product that's licensed in another jurisdiction but doesn't have pediatric labeling. So there is some evidence there. So perhaps a lower risk study. And then in the middle, there's this potential intersection of the two, which is like a new route where, as the example they give, perhaps there would be early access to therapies that are in phase 1 studies. So they do a really good job of demonstrating this here. And then they go further and they make us think with some of their suggestions about perhaps exploring how there could be a reduced regulatory burden for those single patient studies that are just for access, not for research. So again, if you have a chance to, and some time, another really exceptional article to get you thinking. And I guess what we can say is, clearly we know that there's people in Canada that are doing great work and are thinking about this, but what's being done in other foreign jurisdictions?
Exactly. And I know, Laura, you often say Canada's not often at the cutting edge of policy and regulation. We like to copy and follow. But thankfully for us, there are a few examples that we think, at least in reading them, work a little bit better for clinicians, researchers, and patients elsewhere in the world. So we wanted to put some of those options in front of all of you to see if they make sense, to gauge your reactions, but also very much happy to hear about other options that you may have run into or may be considering. In Australia, in particular, model that really flips the special access program on its head. So rather than requiring pre-approval for most drugs through the special access program, the government instead allows clinicians or other healthcare providers to import a drug first for a seriously ill patient and notify the government second. So the focus and the priority is very much on access to treatment as quickly as possible, with the government still providing some level of oversight in the back end and also collecting data on what drugs are and are not available in Australia, that hopefully lets them try and get those drugs on market or on label. They have two pathways here. So one is for seriously ill patients, which again is treat first, notify second. And then they also do maintain a list of products with established history, and especially in the pediatric space. That may be medications that are on market, on label in other countries, but are not in Australia, where there is a very good amount of evidence and data available, but for whatever reason just haven't been brought into the country yet. That again would be treat first, import first, and then notify the TGA that you've had to take that approach. And then for everything else, so treatments that may be earlier on in their life cycles may not be on market or have a ton of evidence from other jurisdictions. There is an application pathway, but again, unlike Canada, the TGA in Australia does offer guaranteed 2 to 3 working days approval. So clinicians have a good sense of when they will receive approval and when they'll be able to move forward with treating their patients. They do also have what's called an authorized prescriber scheme, and I think this was one we thought might be of most interest to the oncologists in the room. Australia has recognized that there are a particular number of providers who were using the special access scheme quite frequently. And so they've set up a system where providers with specific expertise in a condition and with the specific medication and its proposed use or a patient population can get preemptive approval to import. So that, as you can imagine, would be very applicable to pediatric oncologists who may be repeatedly currently using SAP import pathways to bring treatments into Canada, filling up the same paperwork for the same product over and over and over again on a multi-year basis. This would remove some of that bureaucratic burden without opening up the pathway too far to just anyone. And that does, again, have two pathway options within it. So one is where the TGA has proactively identified drugs that are not available in Australia, but do have evidence behind them and are used, as well as a more standard pathway, again, for drugs with slightly less evidence where REB approval may be needed, and there may be additional sort of regulations or requirements around using that drug. The other national level approach that has come up so far has been the UK's approach. And Laurie, feel free to jump in here. I know this focuses a little bit more on the medications with less evidence stream rather than medications not on market in the UK. They have had two streams set up. So one is a process similar to ours where you apply to their MHRA for a review of the benefits and risks of the medication you're proposing bringing into the country. And this is, I think, particularly helpful when there's early data, but again, where drugs have not yet fully been brought to market or are not on label. And then they also have what they call a special scheme. Laurie, correct me if I'm wrong, this is more similar to the special access program in Canada. So there may be evidence here of a drug being on market elsewhere, but not in the UK for whatever reason. And then, Laurie, do you want to chat quickly about the US approach?
Sure, yeah. So just to kind of talk about some new developments in the US without getting into the FDA scheme here. And going back to our slide here again and looking at that potential route in the middle where we talk about early access to new agents in development. 2 weeks ago, approximately, our neighbors to the south, particularly in the state of Montana, have gone ahead and amended their right to try legislation. So right to try was legislation whereby a trial had to have completed at least phase 1. be in phase 2 or 3 of study, and with really a plan to go to market. There was some allowance for patients to be able to access those medications with obviously approval from the manufacturer in a right to try basis. What Montana has done is basically said that now patients are able to access any treatment that has undergone phase 1 testing. There are some limitations in terms of the drug must be manufactured in Montana, and it must be administered in a licensed treatment facility. And there is a provision for 2% of all profit to go back to help those low-income patients who may not be able to access the drug. And there are also more stringent requirements for informed consent. What's interesting about Montana Senate Bill 535 passing is that yesterday Texas has done the exact same thing. Texas has unanimously passed what is called Right to Try 2.0. The point of it for Texans is articulated as to give Texans the right to fight for their lives with every tool possible. This bill has gone ahead and expanded access to personalized medicines for fatal and rare diseases. So right now, particularly looking in the red states, we are seeing some statewide legislation that is trying to do something a little bit different to provide access. Very controversial. Definitely very strong opinions on both sides, but I just thought it was something worth bringing up because it's something that we're seeing that I don't think a lot of us were really expecting to see coming out of Right to Try.
Couple minutes over, but I'll make a couple quick comments. The first is that you'll receive thanks to everybody for joining us, and thanks so much to Gwendolyn and Lori. And I'm going to pose one more question to you before I let you go. This was a really good presentation and hopefully a fruitful discussion for your work. And thanks for sharing your email addresses so that the group can get in touch with you after if they are interested.